When the Christian community speaks about what they think is going to happen and what they envision as a Jewish person, I relate to 99% of it. But the end is different.
Every nation that has blessed Israel, God has blessed them. And every nation that has opposed Israel, God has been in opposition to them.
I know that's a strong word to use, indoctrination, but that's where it starts.
The Apostle Paul said Jesus will come back to the Holy Land. And that's what the evangelicals believe, and they want to support it.
Christians have given through us $1.4 billion to help Israel and the Jewish people.
American evangelicals are a voting bloc of 25% of the American population. Wouldn't we expect to be better represented in government?
Jerusalem is where Messiah will come and establish a kingdom that will never end.
Today we officially open the United States Embassy in Jerusalem, the capital the Jewish people established in ancient times.
We don't believe that Palestine is a place on God's map. That's not evangelicalism. That's fact of history.
The State Department was so afraid to move our embassy to Jerusalem, but to us was a very important signal in prophecy. We've been waiting for that to happen for decades.
So now we're watching end-time signs for the second coming of Christ. There's going to be great tribulation in Israel. There's going to be an end-time battle, the Battle of Armageddon.
President Trump isn't supporting Israel because of the Jewish community. He's supporting it because of his evangelical followers. This isn't about money. This is bigger than this. This is a strategic partnership of God.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. A curious and bizarre relationship has grown stronger over the last several decades between conservative evangelical Christians, ultra-Orthodox Jews, and the settler movement in Israel, and secular political leaders in both the United States and Israel. Some call it a death wish bond of contradictory fundamentalist worldviews, a suicidal Masada complex that sees support for Israel as God's foreign policy. It's a foreign policy in the minds of evangelicals that prophesizes a biblical end times, the Battle of Armageddon and the destruction of the world, a time of tribulation and rapture, where believers and resurrected believers will rise in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, the second coming of Christ. Most of humanity, the infidels and non-believers, including Jews and others who do not convert, will then suffer torment, exquisite and extraordinary tortures of everlasting hell in rivers of blood, fire, and brimstone. Now, this is a recent doctrine of fundamentalist evangelical Protestantism, first derived in the United States in 1909 by Southern Protestant Baptist preachers. It was based on their belief in the infallibility of biblical prophecy and a literal interpretation of the Bible. Most Christian denominations do not subscribe to rapture theology, nor is it found anywhere in the Bible. But these fundamentalists saw themselves in a life and death struggle against modernism, a secular progressive world where scientific theories contradicted what they saw as the literal truths of the Bible. This worldview represents the reality of many cultures and civilizations throughout history. most deadly violence has always been committed in the name of fundamentalist morality and religion. We're thrilled to welcome to the Radical Imagination today two courageous young Israeli filmmakers. Only one is able to be here at this moment, but we have these courageous filmmakers who have been taken on the provocative topic of right-wing politics and religion in both Israel and the United States in their terrific new documentary, Til Kingdom Comes. They ask the right questions, the questions Reverend William Barber, an evangelical himself, also asks. How have white evangelical Christians fused with Trump extremism in a kind of holy war? How has the term evangelical been hijacked by false prophets and used as a cover in favor of greed and corporate interests? How has the faith of conservative evangelicals been used in a heretical way to support politicians that go against the values of love, justice, and compassion that's at the heart of Christianity? How has Christian nationalism become such a strong recruiting tool for the neo-fascist, anti-Semitic hard right? Let's face it, the January 6th Capitol insurrection was as Christian nationalism as it goes. Today we have on the show Maya Zinshtein, who is an Emmy Award-winning Israeli commentator, documentary filmmaker, a journalist, and director of Til Kingdom Comes. Her last documentary, Forever Pure, won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Politics and Government Documentary in 2018 by Independent Lens and PBS. She has a BA and MA from Tel Aviv University and is alumna of the Sundance Institute. Maya has directed and produced numerous documentaries broadcast on Israeli TV and abroad, and her films have screened at over 100 festivals around the world. Now, we were also expecting Avi Trohan to be here. He's also an award-winning documentary filmmaker and director of photography for Til Kingdom Comes, but we will talk about him and his efforts with Maya as well. So welcome, Maya. I'm so thrilled to have you on this show. It's great to see you. You're in Tel Aviv, correct?
Yes, hello, James. It's so great to be with you. And yes, I'm in Tel Aviv. And thank you for such an incredible opening. It was fascinating, even for me.
Well, listen, this is a very provocative subject. You have really tapped on something here. Literally, the importance of the stake of the world here, because we're dealing with a mindset that, if carried forward, will bring about an end to the world as we know it. So, but let's pull back from the edge here and let's talk a little about this. I'm so curious as to how he got started on this project. Do Israelis really understand, or do they know much about the Christian evangelicals that have so supported them in the last few decades?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer, unfortunately, that I hope that today they know more. But before Til Kingdom Come has been released in Israel, I think, basically most of the knowledge of the Israelis on this topic, you can summarize on most of the Israelis would tell you, oh, it's these Christians that love us, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. So, and I'm a person, I'm a journalist as well, and I would believe a pretty broad knowledge about the Israeli politics. And even myself, when I came across this story of the involvement of the Christian evangelicals here in Israel, I have to say I was really surprised, how deep it goes and how actually invested they become in this place. So I started to work on this in summer 2017. when just I will remind you that the United States had a brand new president, Trump, back then.
Don't remind us. Okay, let's all in the past now. Well,
I'm sure you can't forget.
We're trying our best, but we got to be always on guard here. And what you're talking about goes beyond the character that we've now, has gone by the wayside. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah. So you went. Yeah. So 3 years ago, you went to Kentucky.
Yeah. No, before I went to Kentucky, I understood that the United States has a new president that's heavily backed by this community, which is 25% of the American population. That's an important number. And also, I understood pretty quickly that promises has been made through the campaign. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty clear that the upcoming years probably would be very interesting to follow on the political level, and it was pretty clear from the beginning that probably things are about to happen. Of course, in the reality is much more wild always than of what you can imagine. But yeah, I started to look into this direction because of other project that I've been asked to help on, but where the Christian evangelicals were basically a small part in it. But that kind of drove me to look into this direction. And, once I started to read, I was just amazed that nobody here talks about it, and this bond is actually really exists and really has a huge influence on our daily life. And no one, really explored it on a level of a documentary filmmaking. Books has been written about that, but never, a big documentary has been made on that. So it all kind of came together, and I thought that this is the time to do it, and I was definitely fascinated to do it.
Why do you think the Israelis have been so unaware of this? Is it politicians just winked at all of this, or it's not been part of the political conversation? Or is there a state of denial, or even more? Is there some sort of Faustian bargain that has been made here? Well, so what? So if they believe we're all going to go to hell and roast in hell, and if they send money, so what? We'll put up with it, right? I mean, what's going on there? What was going on for so long in Israel that this was not part of the debate?
First, I think it's important to remember that all this bond is presented to the audience, to Israelis, basically to everyone, in a way that these Christians that love us, and it never goes really deeper than that. I think the Israelis kind of got used to be hated. So once someone comes and says we love you, we're just taking it and saying sure, let's take it. But really, that's really interesting. There were some news reports on this topic, but it's really difficult for a news reporter, let's say, if he goes and meets people from the community for a few hours, the conversation probably would stay on a level, we love you, and that's it. It doesn't have the opportunity actually to dig into it. And I spent 3 years of my life on working on that. And, usually the news coverage kind of stays on a very shallow level, just because they don't have the time to go deeper. And also I do think that, political influence is something that is sometimes it's really difficult to measure, and it's really difficult to see from outside. And that's what I was really interested to show, because there is a machine behind the scenes, and you can understand that only by showing it. So I just think that it's a certain combination of this bond. Really, they really, they took the word support of Israel and kind of they own it now, right? If you don't agree with them, it means that you don't support Israel. So they really did a great job on making them a mainstream idea here. And it's unbelievable because, 40 years ago, this was an extremely controversial idea. And the Jews in the United States that tried to reach the Christian community, really, it was a dirty secret. And it feels to me that today is just a secret, and no one considers it as dirty anymore. So yeah, I think it's a kind of combination of these two.
Yeah, very well put. Look, I think it's very important. We're not trying to give an impression here. These are not mean, malicious, sadistic people. I mean, they're not pushing people into ovens over. I mean, they do come across very kindly and loving, and they do very, very much believe that what they're doing is obviously very worthy and it's godlike. But that's part of the problem. I mean, it's again, and what I want to ask you too is what has been the connection with the ultra-Orthodox and the settler community, the settler movement in Israel with that Christian community?
So I think it's important to make it like the ultra-Orthodox community is not the settler community. It's a different communities. The religious Zionists, which are most of them, most of the settlers would be considered as a religious Zionists. They having great connections with the Christian evangelicals because they agree on the political level, right? So these two communities believe that all the land that God gave to Abram back then it belongs to the Jewish people, and the settler community basically found, I think the evangelical community is the only community in the world that openly supports the settlement movement. So their bond is really on a political level where, the settlers finally found someone that really goes with them and believe basically on the same ideas that they believe. The ultra-Orthodox community is very different on that, and they really try to stay away of the Christian evangelical community, but from other reasons, because they really afraid of the converting aspect of these relationships. I can tell you that I've been interviewed to the biggest ultra-Orthodox newspaper in Israel, Yated Ne'eman, and all the interview went around this question: are they really trying to convert us? So I think it's important to understand that there's a differences. But even those in the United States, the Christian evangelicals does find representative from the ultra-Orthodox community in United States as their allies. I hope it's not too complicated. All this
very important distinctions you're making, and I may make it a little more complicated from the other side of the Atlantic here. The American, when we look at the Christian nationalists here, and the quotes and some of the questions I quoted there were from Reverend William Barber, who is also evangelical, but he's leader of the Poor People's Campaign. But they're progressive evangelicals who are extremely worried and point out the connections. Let me just quote here: Christian nationalism includes assumptions of nativism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and divine sanction for authoritarian control and militarism. It's as ethnic and political as it is religious. They believe that America has been and should always be distinctively Christian from top to bottom in its self-identity, interpretations of its own history, sacred symbols, cherished values, and public policies. And it aims to keep it that way. It's a political movement, and its ultimate goal is power. It doesn't seek to add another voice to America's pluralistic democracy. It's a political war over the future of democracy. So, what you're talking about, yeah, go ahead. I mean,
before we going into this really incredible quote that you just quoted, I think it's important to mention that the Christian evangelical community is not monolithic. So, not as Catholics, they don't have a pope. So you can find various ideas among this in this community, and I don't want to try and portray them in one color. That would be just wrong.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, but no, go ahead with your question. I'm sorry.
But there's, as you were pointing out too, they do hold sway, and they do and have supported right-wing politics, and have for many, many decades here. Again, I mean, this goes way back. Oral Roberts and Billy Graham. It maybe not as many Americans knew then. They certainly didn't, but they should now more and more. Billy Graham, when you're talking about the Pope, but in a sense, you couldn't get elected president. I don't care who the hell you were, Democrat or Republican, without a meeting with Billy Graham. And he would bestow his grace and his support. And that was, so these people have had tremendous influence. But you're absolutely right. I'm not trying to paint them with one swath and one swath here, one cloth. But we are in a polarized situation in this country, and I think in Israel too, and around the world. It's fundamentalists. I think that's maybe a way of better approaching it. It's people who are thinking in a very fundamentalist way, and although they may mean well, it's very narrow, it's very dogmatic, and it can lead to these militaristic end of war schemes here. Okay, so you've made this documentary, and I'm what's been the reaction in Israel?
So first of all, I totally agree with you. I think when the fact that people read the Bible literally, that's immediately, as an Israeli, and as the as a person that lives in this holy land, that's kind of scary for me. Because there's many things written in the Bible, and do we need to translate all of them to our today's lives? It's kind of scary to think that these are the powers that actually pushing a very secular political administrations, that these are the powers that standing behind. And I think in that sense, you can find some correlation between the work that the settlement movement and the settlers do here and what the Christian evangelicals do in the United States. Even when you track these two movements back to the history, you can see how they understood at some point. The settlers understood that they cannot only stay in the hilltops of the West Bank, and they need to go to politics, and they need to have an influence in politics. And I think the Christian evangelicals understood exactly the same, that they cannot stay at the pulpit, and they need to go and have a political voice. And today, these two communities are extremely powerful in both countries. So when you're looking at, and yes, they are fundamentalist, and they believe in the Bible, that everything that's written in the Bible is just right, and we should, and that's the direction we should take. So for your question about the response in Israel, it was really incredible, because it has been broadcasted on Can 11, which is basically the Israeli public TV, and it received really wide response also on the media. Many op-eds has been written following the broadcast. And just as you could see in the social media, basically most of the people were writing, "What is that? We never knew that this is happening." So if my goal 3.5 years ago was basically to bring to light these relationships, I think I succeeded in that goal. I do feel that today it's something that people at least heard about this, and they have an opportunity, those who are interested, to actually go and to look into the depth of this relationship and decide what they think about that. And by the way, I heard many Israelis saying, "Okay, so what? We just take the money now," and or the political support, and who cares what will happen at the end of times. But the thing is, and what scares me mostly, is not the end of times, to be honest. It's They have the right to believe what will happen at the end of times. I'm a secular person. I'm less worried about that. I'm actually really worried about what happens today and what the influence that they have on our situation here with the conflict with and how they pushing us to a very specific direction. So that's what mostly afraids me. And another angle of that, so basically we talk about some of their leaders. Some of them are, you can find them in the film, such as Pastor Hagee. They say to their followers, God is watching, everything that happens in Israel. God is watching, and every missile is basically a sign. And when you see these signs, you know that your redemption gets closer. So basically, right, so these people recognize any violence here in Israel as a sign that, for the return of Jesus Christ. And then, when these are the people that I met that we met during the filming in the White House. And Pastor Hagee, I filmed how Bibi Netanyahu says to him and to in his summit, you are the best friend of Israel. This is something that scares me, to be honest. And this is about here and now. This is not about the end of times.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. That's what scares me more than these evangelical ministers is that response by that Israeli and American as well. Well, we'll just do this. We'll take this, and who cares? And that passivity, that banality, what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. That's how this stuff gets perpetuated and gets out of hand. But let's turn actually to the film itself, because we want to get you into Kentucky there. And I love the way you put it. I mean, you as a documentary filmmaker very much wants the story to tell itself, cinema verite. So here you are. Okay, you're making the trip to America. Is this the first time you've been to America, or what? Just set it up for us. Or
No,
you're originally from Russia. Is that right? You're an immigrant from Russia?
Yeah, I immigrated from Russia when I was 10. It was many years ago. Since then, I'm in Israel. But now, of course, I visited the United States.
Okay.
Of course, mostly both coasts, New York. I was in Chicago, LA. But it was definitely the first time that I landed, in places like Kentucky. The first trip was Abby and I actually visited San Antonio, Texas.
Right.
This is the town of John Hagee. It was part of our research. And then our first filming day happened to be in Mar-a-Lago. And it hasn't made it to the final cut, but it was an annual gala of the Fellowship of Christians and Jews in Mar-a-Lago. And it was really incredible to see, very influential Christians.
Yeah, Maya, just for 1 second, just tell us how you were able to set up these meetings, okay, and then carry on with it. I mean, you
as I'm a journalist. So what you do basically when you going into a new subject, you map all the key players, right, and you go to them. Of course, it was easier for me to start from the Jewish side of this bond because I was here in Tel Aviv. So first I reached out to the Fellowship of Christians and Jews, to Rabbi Eckstein Zal, and to other players that understood that they are, key players of this bond. And then you just, you go with that. So nobody invited me to San Antonio. I invited myself.
So you and Abby show up in San Antonio with your cowboy hats and or your kibbutz hats or whatever, and you meet Hagee, who is one of the most
No. I haven't met Hagee in person.
Okay.
No, I attended. I try to understand what would be, can we reach out to him? Would he agree to participate in the documentary? I spoke with the Jewish community in San Antonio, which was extremely interesting. And Rabbi Scheinberg, that runs the Rodfei Shalom synagogue, that he has a great connections with Pastor Hagee. I didn't meet him in person, but it was, that's what you do on a research trips. You go and you meet people and you try to understand how you're going to tell the story. And then from there, we flew to Mar-a-Lago, to Miami, and this event it was extremely eye-opening, I think, for both of us. I think Abby and I understood when we were there, also the close ties to the administration, but also the power of the people that in this bond. And also we started to understand, what is the conversation that they have between them. So yeah, it was amazing scene to film, and unfortunately it hasn't made to the final cut.
Well, this could be I'm making a little bit of a political statement here, but do you in any sense really believe that Netanyahu or Trump really, in their heart of hearts, if they have such things, really care at all about any of this, and who, as long as it's a purely political calculation? Because they certainly, both of them, do not represent that sort of lifestyle that these people are talking about, correct? Or, I mean,
it's hard to know what happens in the heart of politician. But both of them. But when you look in, the reality, both of them secular people. Both of them, both of them had not always would be, their actions on a family level would not always would be considered as something that these communities would accept. But I do think that they understand that they need them, and so people that want to stay in power, they use it. Yeah, they play this game. I can tell you, if we're jumping from Mar-a-Lago 2.5 years forward, and to January 2020, when Abby and I filmed the event of the announcement of the deal of the century in the White House, right? So we were there, and a day before the announcement, Bibi arrived to meet President Trump. A meeting prior the final publication of the plan, and when he finished
to Jerusalem, right?
No. It's about the deal of the century. It was basically the plan that for peace that Trump presented as his solution. And this is one of the last scenes in the film. So I can tell you that the next people that Benjamin Netanyahu met after he met President Trump was the settlers' leaders. I saw them entering the Blair House just when he finished the meeting with Trump. So you understand how they really involved in these processes.
Right. Just a funny aside, maybe, I don't know how funny. When I taught at Yeshiva University, which is modern Orthodox, I had a student, and I'm going to name Yishai Fleischer. He was one of my favorite students. Do you know him by chance? His family came from Russia.
Well, actually, I met Yishai Fleischer on my research, on my early research.
He's got his own show and all kinds of stuff. He was one of my students. I loved it. And then he went this other route here, and I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he's praising God, and he's probably went to the White House. So wait, you got to tell me. So you met Yishai, or?
Yeah. Well, I met Yishai on the during the research. You meet so many people, and Yishai is also, I met him, I think, in one event that has been organized about by evangelicals, if I'm not mistaken. We met there, yeah,
And he served in the army too. He fought in the Israeli Defense Force too. You knew that, right?
Well, most of the people here.
No, he was really. But anyway, okay, we digress. But it's a small country, but it's fascinating how these alliances develop. I must ask you about one of the final scenes where you're photographed, or AB is photographing the minister there in Kentucky, and he is talking with you, and he's being very kindly and friendly and so on, and he's describing the end of days to you, and he's obviously saying, "I love you, and you're just terrific, Maya. God, you're just the best in the world." But all this with smiles and everything. He says, "But you know what? If it happens, God is going to have to destroy you." And I just have to ask you, so how did you feel hearing that face to face? What did you? It was off camera. You were off camera. I would love to get a picture of what you were thinking or how you were looking at him at that time.
It's. I guess you're referring to the very last scene,
Yes.
or to the scene where he tries to suggest to AB and myself to convert in the church.
Well, it's the same sort of angle that
Yeah.
He loves you, but
Yeah. No, but this. I have to tell you, I really appreciate my characters when they are honest.
Mhm.
And I think one of the problems of this bond that it's not a very honest bond. There's a certain conversations that they're just not having with each other, and that's a problem. I think if it's love, how they presenting, so at least you should be honest with the people that you love. And the thing, and of course, we were it took a long journey to get to these conversations, because when you first start talking with Christian evangelicals, all you hear is we love you, and that's it. And I think at some point they started to say, well, first of all, apparently we're making a film about love, and secondly, what it actually means, and all my journey at the beginning was to understand what this love means.
Mhm.
And with Pastor William, it's not that I was shocked, but I was, it was something that we were kind of discussing it, and so you're constantly getting these answers that are not really, in your face, and they just sort of trying to change the subject.
Right.
And I'm glad that eventually we succeeded to bring it to the camera. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that you bring out, I think, is so important, and you spent a considerable amount of time in the documentary, which is fantastic. I just loved it. I mean, I really mean it. It's just riveting, and everybody's got to go see it. Really, seriously. But you spent a lot of time getting the lay of the land and presenting the communities that you were visiting and what they were going through. And this is one of the poorest counties in the country, correct? I mean, 8th or 9th,
Yes.
most the poorest. And yet here are people who can hardly, find enough money for the next meal, somehow scraping through and donating as much as they possibly can to Israel. So, I mean, what do you make of all of that and the use of money and in the face of this enormous poverty?
I think this is when we started to follow the Fellowship of Christians and Jews, that it's important to say they support a very important causes here in Israel. That's no question about that. But I think no one really asks himself where this money comes from. And and to arrive to Kentucky, to Middlesbrough, Kentucky, sometimes the poverty in the United States can look a little bit tricky, maybe for a foreigner, right? You don't see, it's not like It's not like a poverty in Africa, right? So you can see nice houses, but then suddenly you're looking closer and you see a house without a door. And I think when we understood that this is the situation that happens, that basically this that poor community, and again, it's important to say that it's a regional church, so there are people there that attend in this church that have money, but when you're looking in the numbers, this is I think it's considered the fourth worst county to live in America.
Yeah.
And the poverty is almost 50%. These are huge numbers. So I think once we understood that this is the situation, I think we understood also the problem. And you ask yourself about power of faith, and how people that never met a Jew, and of course not an Israeli, and never visited in Israel, working hard and sending their little money to a country that they that is thousands miles from them, and I do think that faith is extremely important, especially in these places. I think faith gives hope, and Israel is part of the faith, and many of them relying on this, on Genesis 12 that says God will bless those who bless you. Basically, God says to Abram, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. So many of people also understand it literally, that if they will donate to Israel, then maybe their financial situation will become better. So it was very interesting to be an Israeli in this place. That's for sure.
I think the real connection here is when it becomes so much part of a foreign policy, and a foreign policy where the whole region is so militarized, and which can bring so many other people, the whole Arab world, into confrontation. And I think this is more of the danger, right? How these issues of faith become powerful political policies that literally can endanger hundreds of millions of people. Correct?
Well, yeah, as I said before, once your political decisions based on a book, a very important book, but that has been written 2,000 years ago, I think it's a problem. Because you're not reading, the situation on the ground, and sometimes you don't think about the actual people that live here. As on the Fiddler on the Roof, as he says to God, can you not to choose us at least once? So sometimes when you see all this excitement about this place, you say, I don't want to be the chosen. I really just want to live my life here. And I do think that I agree with you. It can be extremely dangerous when you have this influence of the religion on politics. And I think this bond and what we see in the film is an unbelievable example of that.
Well, you know what? I think, you're doing your part there to present the picture that people can then view and judge. And I think, as you're pointing out, they didn't really know much about this. I think what we need to do is enlighten people, as you say, and let the story speak for itself. And you do have a prophetic tradition within Judaism and Christianity that Reverend Barber and Cornel West and other people, Susanna Heschel, come from, and Abraham Joshua Heschel. And I think that's what Barber is talking about that these evangelical ministers, in a sense, have hijacked evangelical Christianity, has taken it away from the prophetic radical love message of loving the other, and to beat our swords into plowshares and so on. Would you agree? I mean, this is the sort of message I think Israelis need, and certainly we do as well. And I think that's part of why I was so very excited to have this show with you, because I think across whatever it is, 8,000 miles, I don't know, we're dealing with similar sorts of issues here. And they're profoundly important. And they're tearing up the country and the world. This fundamentalist mindset, this even in the minds of people who mean very well, who are not mean and malicious. I mean, some are, but most aren't.
I totally agree with you. And, I know that you have a new president, and I know, many people feel relieved, but I think it's important to remember that the book of 2,000 years is it's not going to disappear. And of course, 25% of the American population are not going to disappear, and in 4 years, there's new elections. So I think this topic is extremely relevant. Even those that, maybe Trump is not in power anymore, but they won't stop, and they will continue. So I think it's extremely relevant, not only for Israel, but also for the American audience, because I think it's really shows on how deep the involvement of religion in your politics these days.
Absolutely. And I want to make that clear too to our entire audience, which can be worldwide. We're also talking about in the Muslim world and all over the world. This is not just a segment of Christianity and so on. Listen, we only have a couple minutes to go. What are you working on now? And next time we're gonna have AB come over, right? He's gonna make it next time.
Yes, for sure.
Because we want because the photography is beautiful. Tell us how we can see this, how the audience can view this. It's really important.
Yes. So the film is on a virtual theatrical release. I invite people can find all the information. So basically now in virtual theaters in 50 states in the United States, all the information they can find on the website of the film, tilkingdomcomefilm.com. They also can find us on a social media. And I hope that as many people as possible would be able to watch the film and I hope it will make people think. That's my hope.
It will. It absolutely does, and will. And in just a minute, we have what are you working on now? What's the next project? What are you?
Well, I cannot speak about it.
I know. Every filmmaker we have on, Israeli or not, we can't talk. Give us a little hint, the general topic.
Well, I just can say very generally that it's on a very timely topic on one of the biggest industries, one of the fastest growing industries these days. It has nothing to do with Israel. And I'm very lucky to cooperate with the A.B. Troin and John Batzek that also produced Til Kingdom Come on the new one as well.
All right. Well, okay. We will look forward to that new work coming on. Really, it's been a great fun to have you on. It's a terrific film. I hope you promise to come back when this mysterious project that you
if you promise to host me for another wonderful conversation, absolutely. I promise to come. Okay. So it's a deal.
It's a deal. And I haven't been in Israel for a long time. I loved it. I had a lot of fun. I was a kid growing up. I went to a couple of kibbutzim, Kabri and Bet Gavrin. I still have friends in Tel Aviv. Eyal Meged. I don't know if you know him, right? But anyway,
yes,
of course. If you run across Yishai, tell me you should get in touch with me, and we still need to carry on the conversation. Listen, love to meet you. Thank you so very much. What a terrific, wonderful filmmaker you are. Carry on, and we'll see you and Abby at another show. Okay? All the best.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. And thank you so much for all of you here. This is Jim Vrettos at The Radical Imagination. Thank you for watching our show today. And we will now hear a clip appropriately from Bob Dylan with God on our side. And I think we also have a clip of Don Imus doing a spoof on one of these evangelical ministers. Thank you again. See you again next week.
Say hallelujah.
I don't care if the rain don't freeze as long as I got my plastic Jesus right on the dashboard of my car. I can go 100 miles an hour as long as I got the almighty power. The devil might care because he died.
Say hallelujah. Well, say hallelujah. Hi, friends. It's the Right Reverend Dr. Billy Saul Harkis here on behalf of the First Church of the Good Death and Discount House of Worship, coming to you from Del Rio, Texas, the gold buckle of the Bible Belt. Friends, Dr. Hargis is here to talk to you this morning about the most frequently violated of the 7 deadly sins, the one you most flippantly disregard, the one which says, get your heathen hands off your neighbor's old lady. Friends, you know, Moses didn't climb all the way up that mountain to issue the 10 suggestions. Oh, no. And that's why Billy comes to you today with the most wonderful offer he's ever made. A way for you to never again lust after any human being, let alone sin with one. Yes, sir. Now you can mess around and not mess up. Lust without being lost. Because for a limited time and a limited time only, from the First Church of the Good Death and Discount House of Worship's Marital Aids and Rubber Products Division, Misty, the extramarital model. Great God, Misty, the extramarital model. Comes in a 3x5 plain brown package and blows up into 5 feet 6 of potent pink patent polyvinyl. Just specify blonde, brunette, or redhead, then put the old bicycle pump to her and hunker down for a night to remember. And the holy part of this deal is you won't be violating nothing, praise Jesus. And now, sisters, I can just hear you saying, well, what about me, Reverend Billy? Don't fret, honey. Misty, the extramarital model, also is available as extramarital model Max. Yeah, 6 feet 2 of smoking anatomically accurate hunk. And when you get on Max and blow him up there by his unique special valve, you'll be saying, get the chopped onions and the relish. Can I get a bud or can I get a witness? So send now. Send me $200 or $300. Send it to good golly Miss Dolly, Del Rio, Texas. And when Misty comes to live with you, just prop her up there right on your bed and let her give you some really great memories. Say hallelujah.
This one's called With God on Your Side. Oh, my name, it means nothing. My age, it means less. The country I come from is called the Midwest. I was brought up there and taught there the laws to abide. And the land that I live in has God on its side. Oh, the history books tell it, they tell it so well. The cavalry's charged, the Indians fell. The cavalry's charged, the Indians died. Oh, the country was young with God on its side. Oh, the Spanish-American War had its day, and the Civil War too was soon laid away. And the names of the heroes I was made to memorize, with guns in their hands and God on their side. Oh, the First World War, boys, it came and it went. A reason for fighting I never did get, but I learned to accept it with pride. For you don't count the dead when God's on your side. When the Second World War came to an end, we forgave the Germans, then we were friends. Though they killed 6 million and the ovens they fried, the Germans now too have God on their side. I've learned to hate Russians all through my whole life. If another war starts, it's them we must fight. To hate them and fear them, to run and to hide, and accept it all bravely with God on my side.